Hi, so here I'm going to make a video about snowblower starters, and particularly these Tecumseh ones. These generally seem to fail more than the Breeze and Stratton ones. I'm not entirely sure why. The primary reason these things go out is due to improper use and abuse of this thing, which burns out the insulation on the windings inside. All this is a low duty cycle electric motor with very high torque, and the purpose of it is to engage that flywheel and turn over the motor. The best way to actually use this is pull the pull start until you feel it come off the compression stroke and back down on the exhaust stroke. So when this thing hits the flywheel and engages it, it's not going against the compression of the motor, because if it's on the compression or the combustion stroke, it's hitting it with a lot more resistance. So just pull the rope until you feel the resistance give, and then hit the electric starter, and you'll help save your starter and make it last longer. The 100% surefire way to kill this thing is just hold this thing down and let it crank and crank and crank and crank and crank and crank for, a good 30 seconds to a minute, and you'll nicely crisp this thing out. Because if your snowblower isn't starting within the first couple of seconds, you have a carburation problem there if it's not getting enough fuel. So the other things that will happen is the switch inside of here will burn out. Maybe some of these prongs have broken off. The other issues with these are the bolts tend to come loose. The way this particular style goes on is you have these two shoulder bolts that are in the block of the motor, so you can see there's a bit of a gap there, and this kind of just clips on up there, and you screw down these two bolts here. So eventually, over the years with vibration, the bolts may kind of back out a little bit, and then this thing isn't engaging the flywheel correctly, and it'll actually take chunks out of this or chunks out of the flywheel off, or start to wear down this Bendix gear over here. And you can replace these gear heads. You can also replace the brushes in the back of the motor, and I'll show you that in a second. So you want to make sure this thing isn't, flapping in the breeze, and that these bolts are nicely torqued down. These are the screws for the plug end at the top, which hold it down. This style here is sonically welded, so you can't open this up without completely destroying it. The different style of these, as soon as you take those screws out, you can actually separate this and get the switch out, and you can actually order that switch because it's a fairly common part number. Now, the Bendix gear itself, sometimes they jam. The way this works is as soon as you energize it, it shoots out, engages the flywheel, and then it comes back on a spring. There's a spring under this plastic cap here. So sometimes these will stick and you can get away with lubricating it, but if the windings inside of the motor have crisped, then the thing is pretty much finished. Okay, so this one is kind of weird. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You can see it's not doing anything, and then turn this. See, it kind of works. It doesn't work. So this thing has got problems. So we can unscrew it from the back. These are not all the same, the Tecumseh ones. They make different variations of it. Some are shorter, some are have a different style plug at the top. So you really have to replace it with the exact same model that you have. Okay, so on this guy here, you only have 3 screws in the back. One of them is a bit different. I marked it off just so I know where it goes. And you must put this one back in here. The other ones are almost like through bolts. I don't know why they do that. Okay, now when you go to take off the back cover, you want to be careful you don't yank it off, so that A, you don't pull the wires out, and B, the brushes don't all spring out on you. And I'll show you how to do that. So this is how it should look in the back. You can see I tried to grease up the end of this, and it didn't do much. Now, you can replace this whole brush kit And I think it comes with some kind of keepers or something, but the best way I found to get this off is just stick a socket that fits in there, and I'll show you how I do that. Okay, I'm trying to film this behind the camera, but first you can unclip. Oh, see, I marked where the white goes over here with a crayon. You don't want to be doing this if you were just running this thing very heavily because it's going to be hot. And then I'll take my, well, I couldn't find a socket, but I'm going to use this piece of black pipe, and I'm going to stick that on there so that I can raise this, and then you'll see the brushes kind of pop on there. And this is how this is connected on the inside. And there'll be quite a bit of carbon dust in there from the brushes, but if it smells really burnt, or you can see the wires clearly crisped right off, then that's a clear indication that this thing is done for. Okay, so now to remove the brush kit off of the connectors to the motor, you can see how it's this like spaded tab that clips in there, so you got to kind of work that out by pushing it down with a screwdriver or something and pulling it out without breaking this, if you're just trying to replace the brush kit, that is. I found something a bit more suitable to hold the brushes, and you can see how irritating it is when they pop off and the little spring comes out. Okay, so in the process this thing slid out and they've all just fucked off in every which direction, which is what I was trying to avoid, but there you have it. And now we can take the gear off from this Bendix gear over here, and we can free this whole assembly out. This cap, you just want to kind of work it out carefully. You don't want to break it because you need to keep it back on. So that comes off. Okay, there's actually a tool to get this off. I'm just going to yank it off with the pliers. You want to save it and not be too brutal with it, because you're going to need it to get this keeper back on. Okay, I'm just going to show you what I did because I don't have the tool. I managed to grab it with two pliers like this and bend it out. And then I'll have to bend it back into shape to get it on there without breaking it, hopefully. It was a lot more difficult than I anticipated. So now channel locks or vice grips, and then that comes off. Gear comes off. The sleeve comes off. And then the whole armature comes out of the stator. And I mean, it doesn't look too bad inside, so I don't know what the problem could be, but clearly one of these strands is shorted somewhere, and it's just not correctly inducing the magnetic field to give this thing the torque it needs. I did actually first try and sand off this commutator here and clean that up, and it's still kind of doing the same thing. So we can probably go ahead and, you know, check resistances here and everything, but if it's working intermittently, there's a problem with it. It should just work all of the time. You should never have any issues with that. So at this point you would be able to reassemble this armature into the stator. You can put your Bendix back on, and if you're going to be working on a number of these, you want to just go ahead and keep all these for parts, because you can take a bunch of bad starters and possibly make one. If you find yourself in this predicament, just go ahead and look up the part number for the specific brush kit of your starter and see how it's put back together, and then you can go ahead and do that. But what I was doing is just marking all of my wires before I take everything apart. So there you go. It's Tecumseh 37,000 starter.